Thank you very much for joining me for this Operation Greatness podcast. If you don't know me yet, I'm Dan Klatt. I'm the author of Reignited America and founder of OperationGreatness.com. So today we are talking about how awake are you really versus how much were you still asleep. Now we want to go, think of it as various levels. We want to go, we'll look at the surface level and we'll go much deeper than that. Have you seen the whole four-body system paradigm? I think most people are familiar with that and they accept that and they think about that and that's useful to their lives. This is where the lowest level or the most dense is the most gross is the gross body. This is your physical body. And then more subtle than that is your not energy body. That's a different paradigm. We'll talk about that soon too. Is your emotional body. And then more refined or subtle or higher frequency, higher up the spectrum or the scale of awareness and enlightenment and conscious raising is your intellectual body. And then the highest body in that paradigm is the spiritual body. And yet, notice that you have 5 fingers on your hand, and that's like the fives is more than just accidental, let's just call it. If you're more awake, more aware, and less asleep, then you can go more subtle and transcend even the spiritual. Maybe we'll talk about that. I don't know if that'll fit in this. It probably will fit into this conversation. Let me talk about, so let's finish this paradigm first of all. The 4 bodies where some people just get fixated in like the physical body, like the big, like in Sedona, there's a lot of people who are like the women who are yoga people. They call themselves yoginis. And what that means to them is they call it hatha yoga. And it's really, yoga is like a whole lifestyle where you become centered within yourself. And it's holistic, it's mind, body, spirit, integrated, and you do the work in all areas. And yet they're just in the physical focus. And so they're limber and they can, lift their leg over their head. And they can sit in the lotus position with their legs crossed. And, they're very limber and loose and fluid and flowing in their physical body, but then they're dysfunctional in their relationships. Maybe they're vegan or plant-based and they don't eat right and they don't watch what they're eating. For the extreme for this for me was one New Year's Eve, I went down to Phoenix, near Scottsdale, Phoenix, that area, and there was I don't even remember the name of it. It was maybe even called Vegan Fest or Vegan New Year or something, and it was great. They served great food, and it was good people. They were kind of like my people, but they were sort of like 15, 20, 25 pounds underweight, many of them, because they're missing. It's like all they're doing is not eating meat and not eating dairy and eggs, but they're not really aware or in tune with their body to even know how deficient they are. So they're mostly asleep and they're just awake in one narrow slice. Or the men who are the extreme bodybuilders and they eat their 20 or 100-gram shakes in the morning, and they, exercise, and they're, lifting weights for 2 hours, and then they're walking for 2 hours or running for 35 miles. And, the extreme of that was a gentleman I interviewed after I was the assistant managing editor and I created a new job for myself. And, well, anyway, I interviewed this guy, and he ran I don't even remember the name for it. Maybe it's called ultra marathons. And he would run on hard surfaces and maybe even barefoot. I don't remember if it was barefoot or not, but anyway, 80 miles or something like that. Maybe I don't remember if he ran 400 miles in 1 week, or I don't remember exactly the details of that. But, that's hardcore. But I think he was more balanced because I think he was more awake. So, this is I want to give you a broad perspective here, and I want you to see where you are in terms of how awake you are now versus how asleep you may have been before. So I'm giving you, I feel like this gentleman, I don't remember his name anymore, that was 1998 or 1999 when I interviewed him. Must have been 1998, because that's when I left my job as an assistant managing editor at the last newspaper where I worked. And anyway, I feel like he was well balanced in his physical and emotional, and I think he was intellectually very sound because I think he did his research, and I don't think he harmed his body, even pushing it beyond the limits that most people think they have. And by the way, do watch my Operation Greatness podcast entitled Becoming Unlimited, because all limits that you think you have or that you imposed before now on yourself, you made them limitations in your life. So that example of this gentleman who ran, if it's called ultra marathons or whatever, I think he was well balanced and more awake than, I don't know, let's call it 98.3% of the population, maybe even more, like 99.4, 5, 6, 7%. I think he was integrated, and that's a good example for us to create in our lives, that balance and integration by becoming more awake. And you become awake by drawing attention to yourself, remaining in your center. So we're going to expand to other areas where people were asleep. And actually, let's do that now, because I want to make sure that you really get the core message in this conversation in our Operation Greatness podcast right here. So, where were you over the last 4 years or 5 years, especially since when I became very aware of it was March of 2020? You know what I'm talking about. You're kind of nodding your head and saying, yeah, most of us were asleep then. Do I have to give it a name? And I call it Fraud 1.0. Really hit America at that time, and it started, of course, in Wuhan, China, and then I think it hit Australia before it came to our shores in America. And this was not about a supposed infection, or people have likened it to the common cold. It was about control. It was Fraud 1.0. It was the crime against humanity. It was what I call the attempted totalitarian takeover. And if you're awake, aware, not asleep, you know that this has been sort of hanging in the wings, lingering, I got a visual of kind of like a tarantula just holding back on the sidelines, waiting for the whatever it is, a small bird, or I don't think tarantulas eat small birds, but, whatever it is, some kind of a prey, waiting for it to kind of like fall asleep or get distracted, and then the tarantula is going to pounce and eat its prey. I mean, this is really about predator-prey. Like, there's a group of people who are in positions of influence, had been in positions of influence because of people being asleep and unaware of these systems of enslavement. And this is part of you being awake. I mean, there are those who know and those who don't know, and there are those who know who say, what do they say? Once you have seen it, you cannot unsee it, or you cannot fall asleep again, or become unaware again. And so this was all, I mean, even Joe Rogan had his moment of awakening, and I think Tucker Carlson did too. And, all these people, well, RFK Jr. is a great example where he used to support this system of control, and he, his vice presidential candidate, I like her too, and Nicole Shanahan. I think she's an excellent example of this, where I think she used to be some high-level executive, I forgot what she was, for Google even, one of the most blatant examples of asleep. And she even gave, I think she even says, what did she say? She gave, I don't remember if it was $50 million or $100 million or more to the Democratic Party. And then when she became the vice presidential candidate of RFK Jr., then she saw the party vilify her even, and him, and just, egregious abuse. It was totalitarian. They were, anyway. And she saw the light very quickly, because all of a sudden she's going against the designated dictator. I used to call Biden wannabe Supreme High Commander Biden. And I mean, that's really what it has been, how could the leader of the Democratic National Communist Party, Joe Biden at the time, how could he order that everyone must take this experimental toxin, the bioweapon, and even order that businesses mandate this, require every one of their employees to kill themselves? Otherwise, these businesses would be fined, I think it was $1,200 a day. I mean, who even talks about this? And yet that's the level of asleep that most people, or too many, and one is too many, were. You recognize that as a total violation, a total betrayal of everyone who was required to subject themselves to this, and good thinking, fine people, they took it because they felt they had to. And I mean, when this happened in March of 2020, when this came to our shores, I was dating a doctor, and I saw the pressure that she felt. She was under so much stress because she saw, the hype, the lies, the manipulation. They were saying hundreds of millions of people were going to die from this thing, and we did not survive as a relationship because of the stress and pressure. But she, I respect her, because even though she was, or I don't know, I haven't talked to her in a long time now, she was a doctor, a medical doctor, and I think she quit for the hospital, which was very corrupt, and succumb to the manipulation and the fraud and they were, anyway, because they were promoting being asleep and they were promoting this crime against humanity. And I think she walked away from it. I don't think she succumbed to that mandate. And so I don't know what she did after that, but I respect that she did not comply. She had that level of awareness or awake. She was more awake than that. And because anyway, this was so abhorrent, it's unconscionable what they thought they could do to us, because they looked at us as just prey and them as predators, and they thought they could do anything they wanted to us. And for the most part, they were right. They did. But for this guy, wannabe Supreme High Commander Biden, to say that you have to inject this into your body, and they stopped the animal trials because so many animals were dying. I mean, that's not logical. It's incomprehensible. It's unconscionable even. And yet, for him to order you to put this into your body, I mean, people have said very accurately that constitutes rape. For this guy to have ordered that and ordered businesses to order that assumes what? That the government has absolute sovereignty over you, your body, and your children and their bodies. That's how asleep we were. And now, I mean, so many people have come around and recognized, wow, yeah, that is totally wrong. That assumption, that presumption, that assuming that the government is sovereign over you, your body, and how you raise your children, that's that's beyond extreme. That requires totalitarian control. And that's an absolute violation of the fundamental precepts that made America the greatest country the world has ever known. It's written in the Constitution, in the Declaration of Independence. We created the Declaration of Independence as a response to totalitarian control, such as what the last administration assumed to have. That's the level of asleep we were. And like communism is like cancer, it only can survive in a body or system made weak by years of programming, manipulation, fraud, putting people to sleep, keeping the masses distracted, which is a form of causing people to be asleep or hypnotized, and that's a form of sleep also, right? So this is really what the question is: how awake are you? This is what it's really about. How awake are you to what's happening, the complete violation and betrayal by people who are only seeking to control the population, the masses, you, your family, your livelihood, your happiness, your ability to thrive, become successful, have everything you want. If they only can succeed in it's beyond my comprehension, their greed, their narrative, their control, their desire to have absolute control over you and every one of us. I mean, like the transhumanist agenda, you're awake enough to know about that, right? Where they want to have chips in your brain, or like the nanoparticles, the machines, the robots in the bioweapon, and the dumbing device that you've seen that become weaponized, or maybe are you awake to that at least? And the EMFs and the smart meters and the smart cities and, I mean, how much are you awake to all of this? And yet, even that is still, like, let's call that the emotional and mental level. There's still the spiritual level, and there's still beyond that. So how awake are you to those levels? I mean, even all of this stuff that I've been talking about here for the last, 10 minutes or something, introducing you to these questions, are you awake to these things? That's still, let's call that just below surface level. Like you have your skin, and then underneath the skin is, whatever that is, cartilage, tissue, veins, whatever, but it's not to the heart, right? There's still, anyway, like, so even this stuff, like, that we've been talking about here, like being aware of the attempted totalitarian takeover, like if we have surface level here, like, we will build back better, or the 2030 agenda, about that, the World Economic Forum, and they're meeting right now this week in Davos as I'm speaking here, and they're talking about how this is the predators, and they think of you and I and all of us as prey, and they think of the resources of the land as being theirs, and that they have the right to control them, and that's what they're instigating. And the whole digital ID thing, the whole central bank digital currencies, that's just about that. That's about control, right? Authoritarian, totalitarian control, like what China has. What do they call that? The social credit score. That's just about absolute control, right? Where you can't buy food, you can't maybe even, like they lock down whole apartment complexes, and they wouldn't let people leave their apartment even to buy food if they were not compliant, good little Chinese slaves. And that's what they want to install globally. Don't ever let them do that. And we have to talk about this. We have to make people aware of this so that they're not asleep, and that this happens like what happened with Fraud 1.0 and the whole lockdowns. That was just a fraud. That wasn't about this supposed virus thing. That was about getting people to comply, to not question the authoritarian takeover, the totalitarian regime, punishment, system of control and abuse. That's all that was about. That. You've even seen, I just read today a quote from Fauci saying that we had to do the masks and the lockdowns to get people to comply. Otherwise, there was no way that they would accept this authoritarian. He didn't use those words. He used an expletive, actually. This BS narrative. It was quoted from him. And, of course, if you have that degree of awareness, if you're awake at least that level, then you understand all of this, and you're saying never again. Your silence was your compliance, but that's still only slightly below surface. Surface level is, we have to all work together and do our part to not promote the spread of this fraud. And then even, like that cartoon that they passed around that said, wait a minute, because I'm not using an umbrella, you feel scared and feel like you might get wet even though you have a raincoat on and an umbrella and you're standing under a roof. You're upset because I'm not wearing a raincoat or an umbrella or standing under anything. I'm getting wet. You feel threatened by that. You might get sick from me not protecting myself from the manipulation. Anyway, we have to still heal as the prey that was assaulted and violated so pervasively by the mass media, by the former administration, by state government, by Congress, by businesses, by big pharma, of course, by everywhere, almost everywhere. I mean, they were closing churches, and yet the bars could stay open, and, it was unfathomable, and it was it's madness, complete madness, that so many people still complied because they were asleep. And they're still asleep. Anyway, we need to wake up as the human race, as our human family, and we need to come back together as the human family. And yet, that's still close to the surface. It's below the surface, that level of awakeness of these people completely violating, betraying their responsibilities, their positions of influence, the people, like in Congress and in state governments and local governments and national governments around the world, completely betraying the people who elected them, hired them to represent them, to serve them. And all of them who did that, they need to be arrested and to pay for their betrayal, their violations. They don't deserve to have any positions of power, influence, leadership. I got very nervous or uncomfortable when I saw that bioterrorist Bill Gates, and he has earned the right to have that label attached to his name every time his name is used. Bioterrorist Bill Gates, when he said that he wanted to meet with Bill Clinton, that's totally, my mind slipped there. When he said, I think it was President Trump actually who announced that bioterrorist Bill Gates wanted to meet with him, and I think President Trump said, I don't know if I should do that. No, President Trump, absolutely not. You should stay away from that guy. That guy needs to be relegated to solitary confinement because he's done so much damage to the world as it is, more than hundreds of thousands of lifetimes of damage this one person has caused as one of the, most upfront agents of evil on the planet today. Did you hear that President Trump had considered or wanted to use, I don't know the degree of that which is accurate, Bobby Kennedy as the person in charge of the COVID response back in when he was president, near the end of his term. And Bill Gates bioterrorist Bill Gates called President Trump and said, no, you don't. That would be a mistake to put RFK Jr. in that position. You want to have Fauci be that person. That was part of the manipulation. And President Trump, I think, was unaware of all of this stuff, and it took him by surprise. And now, so then I guess President Trump did apparently meet with bioterrorist Bill Gates, and now all of a sudden they're announcing this $500 billion initiative for AI to create a cancer vaccine I don't have any trust of that. But anyway, this is, I mean, so, where is your level of awakeness here? Is this still part of the manipulation? And is President Trump, I mean, I know Bobby Kennedy knows how egregious and awful and dangerous these bioweapons are because of what they put inside them and what that does to the people who take them and, who comply with that or do it of their own will and volition. And I trust Bobby Kennedy, but what is this new thing about? I don't have any trust of that because I don't trust the systems that created the last, Fraud 1.0 and did this whole thing. Do you have any trust of that? Well, and then there are those who say, well, that all of this is play. It's just orchestrated. It's like a movie that has to play out in a certain way to wake people up, and that, that it was all a facade, and that the good guys, they call them the white hats, were in command even during the Biden, where Biden, the totalitarian regime, the communist, Marxist, fascist, authoritarian regime, that actually President Trump was the commander-in-chief during that time. There are those people who say that. Is that another level below the surface? I mean, it was such madness. To me, it only made sense that was true, except, and Elon, his company Neuralink, which is about connecting people to, and he's a well-known transhumanist, and, he doesn't hide his ties to the World Economic Forum, and other than that he says that globalism is the wrong form of governance, except, he has as his CEO of X now, Twitter, a former, I don't remember if she was high-level executive with the World Economic Forum. He hired her as his CEO. And I never saw any kind of statement from him to justify that. Does he really care about free speech? Well, then why is he oppressing people on X? And I mean, like, my 182,000 plus Twitter followers, most of my posts are not seen by 99.9% of my 182,000 followers. That doesn't sound like a free speech anything. Anyway, I mean, so, how much are you awake to even that? But is there this other level, like the whole QAnon thing, that this is all, like they say, like the Biden years were designed to make people, like life was so horrific where, black is white and white is black, up is down and down is up. And I mean, like, how could it ever be considered appropriate where your children have to be exposed to a trans show in your school or in your local library? Or, it used to be like the sexualization of children. How could that ever be considered right, appropriate?